Hello, everyone. It's great to be back at COSCUP. I have been going to this event for so many years. I have no idea how long I've been going to the event, and that's wonderful. It's an opportunity always to learn new things and to meet interesting people. I'm so sorry that I can't be at COSCUP this year, that I can't meet you face to face, but we have this opportunity to hear from each other for a few minutes, and I will do my best to share something important and exciting. Our topic is open source and ISO standards. And I'll be talking about OpenChain and the future of compliance, because compliance is a very important part of open source and ISO standards. My name is Shane Coughlin. I'm the general manager of the OpenChain project at the Linux Foundation. This project is just one of several that addresses compliance and governance. For example, we have the SPDX project, which is about software bill of materials. We have the COSCUP project, which is all about OSPOs, open source program offices. And we have other projects like Fossology, which is about tooling and automation. These different parts of the Linux Foundation collaborate closely, and we work together for a simple goal: to have fantastic open source governance available for everyone, any company of any size in any market. Now, my perspective at the OpenChain project is very high level. In case you're not familiar with it, OpenChain ISO 5230 is a process management standard. In some ways, it's similar to ISO 9001, a quality process management standard. What OpenChain is doing is managing open source compliance. It identifies the points where you should put a process to have the key requirements of a quality open source compliance program. It's a simple standard. The entire ISO document is only 7 pages. So obviously, it's designed to be easy to adopt, easy to use, and of course, easy to understand. Now, when it comes to something like OpenChain as an ISO standard, or talking about software bill of materials, or talking about automation, or talking about OSPOs, the natural question is, why standardize? Why do things like bring everyone together to have certain ways of doing things? Doesn't that sound restrictive? And the answer is not the way we do it. We were very careful in making a standard like OpenChain to make sure that it would show you where to put a process, but it wasn't going to be prescriptive about how the process is filled. Instead of doing that, we created a very large international community, and we have a huge amount of reference material. Example training programs, example open source policies, none of them prescriptive, but all of them available for you to see. I'll give you an example. Many companies in the OpenChain community collaborated on making a training slide deck. And the idea was to have a really short example training deck that people could take and use, make parts of, expand for whatever they needed to train their people in open source compliance. Now, OpenChain says have a training program. It doesn't say how complex it has to be. It doesn't say how simple it should be. It says there should be a compliance program. Training should be available. And here are examples, many examples of what different companies do. Now, given that we're distilling something like compliance process management into an easy to understand way, the question is, does it work? Does a standard like OpenChain work to solve the problem? And the answer is yes. It is adopted by companies like Microsoft, Hitachi, LG Electronics, Toyota, Samsung Electronics, and many, many more. This is a standard that brought together, at this stage, thousands of people with decades of experience in open source to solve the problem conclusively. And it worked. Actually, OpenChain is a very interesting ISO standard. Did you know it's 14 years since the last time Linux Foundation made an ISO standard? The last time we made an ISO standard was Linux Standard Base, which you might remember was all about defining Linux. 14 years later, open source is massively successful. All of your companies use it. Every company everywhere uses it, basically. But with that success, came challenges with getting things reliable. And particularly in the supply chain, and I know how important Taiwan is in the supply chain. Particularly in the supply chain, we had challenges, company to company to company, communication about process management, communication about software bill of materials, communication about other activities to make sure that the software going through the supply chain is conformant, compliant, and well understood. We had many challenges. OpenChain, I said, was a process management standard, very high level. It sets the framework. And after OpenChain, you say, okay, now we add software bill of materials. Now we add automation. OpenChain is the foundation for the future of compliance. Reliable, easy to adopt, easy to understand, clear standards. OpenChain is the first ISO standard out of the Linux Foundation to address this. And now we're moving down the stack. SPDX is a draft ISO standard as I record this. When you watch it, SPDX will probably be published. It's a software bill of materials. It has been developed over 10 years. It can be used in XML, JSON. It can even be used in spreadsheets. And it allows companies to transfer software knowing what it is, what license it uses, what version it is, and so on. With OpenChain and with SPDX, we are rewriting supply chain efficiency. And bear this in mind, it isn't just about, did we follow the license for legal reasons? It's also about, is this going smoothly, or do we have to waste time and therefore money on fixing stuff later? Every time a product gets near market and you find a problem and you have to go back through the supply chain, so much is wasted. OpenChain, SPDX, these are how we dramatically reduce waste, increase efficiency. This is it. This is the method. And that's why the companies all around the world are using it. I want to give you an example, a very, very concrete example. I mentioned companies that are OpenChain conformant. And those companies are huge. The fact that Toyota adopted OpenChain is world-changing for automotive. Microsoft, Google both use OpenChain. That's amazing. That changes cloud forever. LG Electronics and Samsung, wow, that shifts the needle on consumer electronics. But it goes further. What about a company not only adopting OpenChain, but asking their supply chain to use it explicitly? It's happening. For example, Scania, which is a Swedish truck company, it's part of Volkswagen Group. Scania has just released a new corporate standard, STD 4589. The Scania corporate standard explicitly asks suppliers to use OpenChain and use SPDX. And there you see the beginning of a very interesting future. It's happening elsewhere in automotive too. Scania is not the only company changing the supply chain. For example, Hitachi is OpenChain conformant, as is Panasonic, as is Bosch. All of these companies are suppliers to Toyota. And that plays a big part in what they're doing. What about all of the companies in Taiwan making stuff for Samsung or LG, Sony? Increasingly, you can expect your customer companies to ask you for OpenChain conformance and perhaps SPDX conformance. This is not a threat. This is not a challenge. This is an opportunity, two parts. The first part, stop wasting money. Stop wasting time going back and forth with customer companies because of problems. In Ireland, I remember being told that carpenters had a saying, and their saying was, measure twice, cut once. Having a process standard to make sure that things are going smoothly, having a software bill of materials means that you don't have to recut your process. You don't have to fix things all the time. And I'm sure that we both understand clearly how many companies in Taiwan don't have the people, the time, and the money to address these things again and again. These standards offer a very clean, clear way to resolve that. And there's a second part. The second part, quite frankly, is that the companies using the ISO standards, like OpenChain, are very visible as being right there beside Microsoft, Hitachi, Toyota, right there with the very best companies in the world doing compliance. It's a great way to advertise how your company has a mature approach to addressing process management in open source. Right. OpenChain, process management around open source compliance. SPDX, software bill of materials. Automation that's open source, like Glossology or Scan Code or open source review toolkit. None of those I'll go into today in depth, but there's a lot out there. From process to automation, you have standards and projects to support you. The ISO standards, like OpenChain, ISO 5230, or the forthcoming SPDX standard, these are the long-term, reliable, fixed parts of compliance. And that's important. The OpenChain ISO 5230 processes won't be suddenly changing on you. If you adopt these, it's just like ISO 9001 for quality. You are meeting the market requirements. You will meet it today, tomorrow, 1 year from now. It supports you in the long term. SPDX is a software bill of materials. The community spent 10 years making it. It's reliable. It's consistent. It's not going to be changing suddenly on you. This is how you solve things long term. But of course, there are aspects of compliance that aren't like that, where you have to evolve things quickly, like tooling, automation. You can expect tooling and automation, such as open source tooling, open source automation, not to be ISO standards. They have to change all the time. But what you can expect from open source tooling and proprietary tooling is that they will support OpenChain and SPDX. If they don't do it today, they will do it tomorrow. In our community, you'll find vendors like Synopsys, FOSS-ID, WhiteSource. All of them know exactly what we're doing and why we're doing it. All of them are getting ready for the future of OpenChain ISO 5230 being everywhere in the supply chain. And they're also getting ready for the future of SPDX being published as an ISO standard and every tool needing to ingest and export SPDX conformant information. And once that happens, company by company, department by department, everything becomes smoother. And that's the future of compliance. Standards for the stuff that doesn't change often, but we need. Active projects for the stuff that changes often. Everything working together in harmony, in collaboration. OpenChain, SPDX, to-do group, Quadsology, open source review toolkit, Synopsys, White Source, FOSS-ID. We're communicating. And we're communicating in very interesting and clear ways. OpenChain is fully owned and controlled by user companies. It's not run by vendors at all. Then you have vendor companies like White Source or FOSS-ID or Synopsys or Orcro. And of course, they have a very different perspective. But we all agree that the future of compliance is based on these ISO standards. It's based on collaboration. It's based on interoperability. And that's what we're building. That's why I'm here today, just to tell you what we're doing, because I need you. We have fantastic people in Taiwan working with the OpenChain project. But I want to work with more of you. There are companies in Taiwan that I'm not talking with actively today, like TSMC, MediaTek. I want to. I think we need to collaborate more and more closely. What's happening is a revolution that's going to save us so much time, so much money, and so much complication. Our next step, come to an OpenChain meeting. We have them physically when COVID allows, and virtually otherwise. In Taiwan, we hold the meetings in Mandarin. Come over, let's talk, let's share case studies, and let's build that future of compliance together.